You're listening to the Hello Awesome podcast, and this is episode number 126. Hey, everybody, welcome to season 8 of the Hello Awesome podcast. I am so glad that you are here, and I am so glad to be back. Feels good being behind the mic again. I am JC Lee Pulford, your host, and I am going to bring you some incredible stories of transformation this season. Around this same time, exactly 2 years ago, during Testify, the 4th season of the podcast, you might remember our hearts and minds were changed as we heard multiple women of God share their coming to Jesus stories, including my own. You can re-listen to season 4 Testify, starting with episode 75 all the way through to episode 87. So as you wait for these new episodes to drop, you can always go back to enjoy those. This season, you are going to hear more real people sharing their real testimonies in between a Bible study on the fruit of the Spirit. Every other week here on the podcast, we are going to dive into Galatians 5, especially verses 22 and 23, to take a look at what makes up the fruit of the Spirit and why we must deny the lusts of the flesh in order to fulfill the calling that the Lord has placed on our lives. But today, we kick off this season, season 8, with our first guest sharing her story. Emily Scott is a worshiper and a boutique owner, taking us through her past as a troubled teen before Jesus changed everything. I am giving these testimony episodes a parental advisory warning due to their content, so please put on some earbuds and use your discernment respectfully. Okay, guys, let's get into this first episode of the Hello Awesome podcast, season 8, Fruitful. This is episode number 126 that I am calling Church Connection with Emily Scott. Hey guys, I'm JC. Are you ready for real conversations about faith, business, and life? Me too. This is the Hello Awesome podcast, where I bring forth topics and truthful insights that will encourage you to make intentional choices and pursue God with your whole heart. Are you ready to say hello to the awesome blessings that God has for you? All right, let's do this. As you know, every season I have wonderful friends that are willing to bless you with some deals, and this season is no different. Back again to sponsor the podcast is our good friends over at Nuggles. If you are looking for stylish yet comfortable modest clothes this season, Nuggles has the best items to add to your closet at an affordable price. Just use our special code HelloAwesome10 for 10% off at nuggles.us. That's nuggles.us, and upgrade your modesty game right now. It's hard to know what products are toxic for your skin these days, right? But shopping with Oneness Essentials, you won't have to worry about anything except how to not be completely obsessed. Like with their luscious lotion sticks, creamy body butter, and handmade cold-pressed soaps available in so many scents. Never worry about dry skin again. Use code HELLO8 for 15% off your order at onenesssoapbiz.com. That's ONESSSOAPBIZ.com today. Kaylee is a modest shop for athletic apostolics and the daily go-getter. With quality stretchy skirts and dresses, Kaylee has what you need to make your wardrobe more versatile. Use code HelloAwesome15 for 15% off your order on their website, kaylee.com. That's KHAYELY.com. And check out their wide selection today. Listen, I love being artsy. You should know that. But my handwriting kinda isn't the best. Thankfully, we have the graceful pen, a place for joyfully handmade stationery and gifts to uplift, inspire, and encourage. Table cards, invitations, gift tags, and envelope calligraphy are just some of their beautiful services. I truly think the graceful pen is doing something so wonderful, and I hope you will take advantage of using our code SOHAP22 for 5% off your custom calligraphy service this season. Our last sponsor of the Hello Awesome podcast is truly changing lives while also nourishing our skin with a spa-like quality. Delish Lips offers organic skincare with aromatherapy while donating 100% of their proceeds to world missions. Shop this unique but powerful ministry by going to delishlipsnaturalbeauty.com and consider the change you are contributing to all around the world in the name of Jesus. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Hello Awesome podcast. We are here with another guest for you. I love having guests on the podcast because they just share how much God has done in their lives and special stories that are unique to them, because our God is such a unique and loving God. And Emily, I want to just thank you so very much for being on the podcast today. I do not take it lightly. I know it takes bravery. It also takes humbling ourselves to share our stories when we're vulnerable. But before we get started, I would love it if you could just share a little bit about you, who you are, and what you do to the listeners.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. But my name is Emily. I'm from Arkansas. I'm 24 years old. I own a modest clothing boutique here in Bryant. And then my parents also own a cupcake shop next door, so I kind of help them out as well. I am a part of my church's worship team, as well as the children's ministry. I love music. I love traveling, spending time with my friends. And that's about it.
I love that. So what's the name of your boutique?
It's called Emmy Sue Boutique.
Is that what they call you?
Yes.
I love it.
Yeah, my name is Emily Sue. And, I'm from Arkansas. So, of course, it's going to have that, Southern twang to it. But my mother growing up, if I was in trouble, it was Emily Sue. But if she was being sweet or I was being sweet, it was Emmy Sue. And then all the kids in my life, they call me Emmy. So like my nieces and nephews and everything. And so I just decided to, it'd be a cute little name.
Yeah, it really is. So that's EMY.
Yeah. EMY and then SUE, and it's one word. Yeah.
So I came across your Facebook post that went viral sharing your testimony, which I bet was a little bit scary and frightening for you. Because I know that everybody has their own story about coming to the Lord or their own coming to God moment. And for some of us who weren't born in the church, that could be very shocking, to say the least. And so there are always a lot of layers to our stories, yours in particular. And I want to start from the beginning, which I believe happened when you were a teenager. So if you could just briefly share how your life was like as a teen and what were you going through?
Absolutely. So, everybody loves those good old teenage years. So my sisters and so I'm the middle child of three girls. And then it was my mother and then my youngest sister's father. So it was the five of us. My mom and him, they had been married for a good portion of my life. My biological father left before I was born. And so, my parents at the time, they had their troubles. They ended up getting a divorce. I was about 12. And then we ended up moving to Bryant. And so, it's a big change as a teenager whenever you have this lifestyle and then all of a sudden it's, abrupt with a divorce. And, most of the time the kids will go through the phase of, trying to get attention and all of that stuff. I got into drugs and smoking and drinking and acting out. I, just kind of got into trouble with boys and just, anything to kind of seek some kind of attention, I guess. My mom worked all the time. So there really wasn't anybody else. We weren't really close to a lot of like our immediate family as far as like grandparents and all of that stuff. Um, and it was just, my younger sister, she still went to her dad's house, and then my older sister, she had her friends, and I was kind of a little bit of a loner. So anything that I could really do to just, get attention from somebody, I was doing it pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but yeah, I mean, that's about, the basic teenage
Mm-hmm.
life of, the kids, the parents get a divorce, and then you just start acting out and all of that. So
Yeah. Well, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I think I was like 8 years old when my parents split up. They hadn't gotten married yet, but it does something to a child because it's like your comfort is like ripped away.
mm,
That safety of what you knew is gone. And then you also start questioning like, what is love? Does it even exist? Does it even matter?
absolutely.
And whether we really have those questions and we're actually thinking about those questions, that really is what's going on like through our minds. And that's why you see a lot of kids that are hurting, try and numb the pain, as they say,
Absolutely.
with like other things. Um,
Yeah, and for me personally, like, so my older sister and I, we have the same father. He was around for, like, we're 3 years apart, and he was around for the first 2 to 3 years of her life, and then right before I was born, he was gone.
mm,
And then my younger sister's father was around for 10, 12 years of my life, because it wasn't very far after I was born that my mother had met him. And then, he left. So it's like, all the while I'm trying to find attention and, seeking it elsewhere, I also developed like trust issues when it came to a father figure, or like the male figure in general in my life. It was more of like, um, struggling with like abandonment issues. And, you know, a lot of people kind of like, you know, think of that as being extreme. But when you have, like, I mean, every, person, every child should grow up with a mother figure and a father figure, because each part is so crucial to a kid's growing up. Like, I mean, there are things that your mother can teach you that your father can't, and there are things that your father can teach you that your mother can't.
right.
And so to have that missing piece was definitely a struggle for me, especially as a teenager, and then growing up into my adulthood. You could definitely tell that it was definitely harder on me, I guess you could say, for sure.
That does make sense. So, how did God like enter into your story? Like, what were the events that happened that I guess brought you to the awareness of like his existence and it collided with your life?
So about I meant to look at the time frame, but maybe a year at most after we moved to Bryant. We lived in this little subdivision, and our neighbor, um, he introduced himself to my mother. And she always has those hesitations, because at this time she had already had two husbands, so she was kind of like, oh, another male. There was the hesitation, the walls.
Mm,
And
sure.
so he, would invite us to church, and, he'd say hi if he was walking down the sidewalk. Um, and then one day my mom was sitting on the couch, and she had the door open, and he kind of just, walked up to the door and, did that little knock, because, the door is open. She's sitting close to it. So that way she just knew he was there. And he, was like, hey, I'm going to formally introduce myself. Maybe sometimes you'd like to join me and go to church. And so my mom was very like, she had struggled with a lot in her, childhood, adulthood, and church was never a thing for her. She had, trust issues. She blamed God for a lot of things that went on in her life. And so when he said church, it was an automatic like, ooh, like maybe not. And so he made it a point to introduce himself to my sister and I, and my younger sister. And so, he's like, hey girls, I'm so and so, we have, church services. We have great kids department, great youth department, great young adults department. Maybe you should come, see what it's about. And so, with, of course, permission from my mom. Now, this is like over a span of time. So it's not like some stranger, like, hey, come to church with me.
Right.
So he established a relationship with my mom, and, then established a relationship with us. And then one day, it was like a Wednesday night, they had like a watermelon ice cream social gathering at our church. And he was like, it'd be great as a summer thing. Like, you can just come and, meet everybody, say hi. It's not a church service. It's just a social gathering. And so my sisters and I, we ended up going. And, the second we walked in that church, it was like the atmosphere of like just everybody being so welcoming, and, the spirit of, joy and happiness. And, it was kind of like you belong here.
Mm.
Like, and it wasn't even a church service. So it's like, and I would say that's one of my favorite things about this church is I've been there ever since I stepped in that door. I've attended that church. And so that was 12, 13 years ago now. And it was just one of those, as a teenager, you're constantly seeking for approval and for somewhere to fit in and to feel loved. And when you walked into that place, that is literally what you felt. It was like, I'm home. This is where I belong. And it gripped my heart and got my sister's attention. And we knew that, this is it. This is where we belong. And I think I was there for about a year. I went to my first holiday youth convention. Like, that was in the summer. And then that December, I went to a holiday youth convention, got the Holy Ghost for the very first time. And then the next service we got home, we were baptized in Jesus' name. And it's just been wonderful ever since. Been there ever since.
That's amazing. I love that. And, it is so refreshing to hear that it all started with a neighbor, because I think sometimes we are leery of some of our neighbors or we know only a couple on the block that we might, trust or whatever. I have a pretty good neighborhood, but nowadays, especially, we're always like, don't talk to strangers. And it's like, for us church folk, we're like, no, but you're supposed to talk to us. We need to tell you about Jesus.
Yeah.
But that's amazing, especially when you're at such a vulnerable age and you're a teenager, or even when you're a young adult. Like, everything is so confusing. You're trying to figure things out. And to have that reassurance, like when you walk into a place that at least your first impression isn't like overly judgmental. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
I know a lot of us, and I know I can speak from my experience, we feel out of place, when we first get to like a church when we haven't been. And so it really is so important to feel welcome.
So I missed a big important part of that. That man ended up marrying my mom, adopting me and my older sister, because our biological father gave up parental rights. And so he is now my legal father. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
I was like, that's a big part, because I was like, now they're going to say, this creeper, like, invited to the church, this, that, and I'm like, no, he's actually my dad now.
I love that so much.
Yeah,
and
we always tease my mom, and we're like, yeah, you married the boy next door, and she literally did. So
that is so cute.
Yeah.
And just to think too, this is also a testimony of waiting for the right person.
Absolutely.
He was waiting for the right person and literally dropped in his neighborhood. Oh my gosh. I love that so much.
I was like, maybe I should add that, because that's very important.
That's like a Hallmark movie.
Absolutely. Yeah. They ended up dating. And I think like the summer after I got the Holy Ghost was when they got married. So it was like, we started attending, and, she started going to church and all of that. And then, all of that ended up falling into place, and they got married.
That's amazing.
They've been married for 12 years now.
I love that. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. So I wanted to talk a little bit about of all the things that you experienced leading up to that point and
Hmm.
all of the things that you struggled with. What did you find was the most difficult or the most challenging for you to let go of? Because I know some things God helps us with, like on the spot, but there are other things that take a little bit of time.
So just, looking back for me, I think the hardest thing that I've struggled with, I mean, even from growing up to getting into church and even being an adult, is my identity. And that sounds so cliche. Like, and, how would a teenager have an identity crisis? How would a young adult have an identity crisis? And for me, I was always seeking attention, seeking approval. I wanted to be there for everybody, whether it was being the perfect best friend, being the perfect sister, being the perfect daughter, girlfriend, whoever it was. What can I do to please others? What can I do to make this person happy? What do I need to do to make this person happy? And so as a teenager, that can seriously affect you, because especially depending on the groups you were in. Like for me, I never really was in one particular clique. I had friends with, I was friends with everybody. I was friends with the jocks, the cheerleaders, the, choir kids, the
Mm.
loners, like, but in order for me to do that, it was like I had to change my personality for each group. So it wasn't like, they were liking me and enjoying my presence for who I was. It was, I was forming this personality to make them like me. That's what I wanted. I wanted someone to, you know, look at Emily and be like, yeah, that's the person that I want to be. Like, I want to be
Mm.
just like her. And, she's the cool kid. Like, if we can, and for me and my mindset, I'm like, okay, so these kids are smoking this. So in order to be friends with them, that's what I need to do. These kids are drinking this. So in order to be friends with them, that's what I need to do. This group is gossiping and, they talk bad about so-and-so and they, talk about this. So that's what I need to do. And along the way, I just lost myself. I was so worried about fitting into whatever group I could fit into, to feel appreciated, to feel loved, to feel like I was something. And for me, I think the biggest part, or the most like scarring thing, is if you're not careful, it will bleed over into your adulthood. Like, it's no different than, like, yeah, it's in school, you want to be popular, you want to be the popular kid. But then as an adult, you want to be the fun person, you want to be the one everybody goes to when they want to have a great time. And, you want everybody to come to you when they need somebody. And when you are so focused on being the person that, everybody wants you to be, like I said, you lose yourself. And for me, I became depressed. I constantly had anxiety. I turned to things that I shouldn't have to, you know, distract myself from those situations. I would turn to relationships and drinking and this, that, and the other. And in high school, I turned to, cutting, and because I was never happy. I was never like satisfied. I was constantly finding something to, you know, forget what I've done with other people. And I just lost myself. And I ended up having to go on to, antidepressant medication. I ended up just driving myself crazy to please other people. And I think that that was probably the hardest thing that I experienced, and the hardest thing once I found God and got a relationship with Him. That was the hardest thing to let go, was because now that I'm in church, I need to uphold the perception of what a church girl,
Mm.
a woman of God should do, like should act,
Yeah.
dress this way, act this way. And, I'm supposed to be perfect. I'm not supposed to, do anything wrong. And so whenever God was like, listen, I know who you are. I know your thoughts. I know your heart. This is not you. And he was like, it's time to let it go. And I was in a season of learning to let go of what people thought, what I've gone through, what people have done to me, what I have done to myself, and focus on what God wanted me to be. Because, I mean, when you truly fall in love with God and truly start to have that relationship with Him, His wants will become your wants. His desires will become your desires. And ultimately, that's, the life goal of people in church is, you want to live like God, act like God. And in order to do that, you have to let all of those things go.
Yeah, I agree. And identity is a big thing. Obviously, we know in this culture, but I think that's just because it's talked about more. It really has
Mm-hmm.
always been a big thing, especially to teenagers and especially to any new convert, because
Absolutely.
I think that's one of the biggest things that we have to remember as people who are in the church is they're not just giving up like one or two things. They're literally giving up everything they've ever known.
Yeah.
And the amount of grace we should have for them should be endless. Uh, because I I know, and I know you know from firsthand experience, is there are so many questions that you're faced with that you didn't even think you would have to face, and you realize that you have to rely on what God says. You have to rely on who He says that you are,
Yeah.
because you can't go back to how life used to be because you no longer see it that same way. Your eyes are open to a better way, God's way,
Yeah.
a new life. And this makes me think of like all the things that you've experienced. How has that shaped your opinion of like today's teenagers and what they're going through?
So before our call, I, was studying and thinking about that question because, and I, did some research and found that the age group with the highest percentage of depression is ages 18 to 29. And then 20% of all teenagers experience depression before they even reach the age of 18. And for me to have experienced those statistics and those, numbers, for me to have personally experienced that makes me want to try even harder to reach those teenagers and young adults that are currently experiencing it.
Mm.
Because for me, I've experienced it, but I have found my solution, and that is God. And I mean, there's a freedom in God that you can't find anywhere else. There's joy, there's peace, there's, freedom of any addiction, thoughts, um, lifestyles that you may have. And it's my job now to reach those that have experienced the same things I have and to share with them what I have found in God. And for me to see those statistics is very heartbreaking because I know what they're feeling. I know what they're going through. And I know that what God has done for me, He can do for them. And so for me personally, I try so hard to let them not feel like they're alone because
Mm.
I mean, 20% of all of teenagers in America, that's a lot of teenagers. And so clearly, they're not the only ones going through that. But I should have looked up the percentages of like young adults or teenagers, in that age group that are actually like actively in church, because that number could turn around and help the numbers that still need to be reached. And for me, having experienced it, knowing what God can do for them just puts an even bigger burden on me to let God use me to reach those that are still hurting and still need to find the truth.
I love that. I mean, I don't love the statistic. Obviously,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
really horrible and terrible. And it just goes to show the mental state of 18 to, 29-year-olds. We really do need to, like I said, have more grace, especially for that age group. I think it's easy for us to have all these expectations for people that age and not realizing that that's probably not helping their healing or their
Absolutely.
development,
Yeah.
And I think it's okay to have, healthy expectations so that they have something to reach towards.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it has to come from obviously a godly source, like a God, the Lord should really influence that, because I think the more pressure that we put on kids, especially teenagers or young adults who are going through hard times, the least likely that they're going to be pulled out of it.
Right.
It's just going to add more to their pile that they're already probably just putting on themselves, or that they're feeling from society and things in general that are happening in their life. And we never know what people are going through. Um, and it's one of those things that even with you thinking about what you went through, I'm sure you didn't even think you would be in church at all, ever. Because I know that was
No,
me. I remember
absolutely.
being around that age, 18, 19, 20, and laughing at church people, thinking how foolish they are and joking around and mocking them. And that literally is the mindset out in the world. And so it's easy for us as church people to like want to argue back.
Mm-hmm.
But I really think if we do respond in love and realize that probably is
Absolutely.
coming from a hurting place,
Yeah.
then we could do more good. So I would love it if you could just take a minute and just, and just share, what would you say to those young people? I have it written down in church, but I guess in general, who are struggling with their mental health and possibly their sexuality. I know we don't like to talk about it, but there are young people in the
Absolutely.
church struggling with both.
Oh yeah,
What would you
definitely.
say to them today?
I so when it was one of my first youth rallies, and so I mean, I was not like, I had the Holy Ghost, baptized in Jesus' name, but it was still all new. So I was still in that like quote unquote transitioning phase. I hate to say it that way, but I mean, just to kind of envision it that way. But the speaker that night, his name was Nathan Smith, and he was talking to those youth and young adults that were attending church, but they weren't in church. Like they were new, they weren't in it yet. And he said that there were 3 P words that he wanted to instill in their minds for them to think about after they left. And the first one was, he wanted them to position themselves to God, to put themselves in the position where they could be used, where they weren't closed off, their minds, their hearts were open and receptive to what God had for them that night and even after that night. So he wanted them to remove distractions, whether it was a relationship, parents, work, school, remove the distractions and just position themselves to be receptive to what God had for them. And the second one was to prepare. And he said he wanted them to, in order to prepare themselves for what God had for them, they needed to pray, they needed to be fasting, they needed to read the Bible, they needed to find someone in the church, or even a friend that's in church or a family member that's in church that they could really trust, that they could talk to about anything. And for that is so important. That was one of the things that really hooked me into coming to church. Was I found somebody that I clicked with and that was already in church, had been in church for years. And I established that relationship to where when something was struggling and I was struggling with something or something was bothering me, I was able to go to them. So Like I was bisexual when I first started going to church. I right before I started going to church, I was in a relationship with a girl, and that was one thing that I heavily struggled with as a teenager. And I was able to go to that person and talk to them without in like a judgment free zone. And for that, I was forever grateful because they were able to guide me, to lead me in the direction that I needed to in order for me to get past it. And so when you are preparing yourself, you want to make sure that you have somebody in the church that you can talk to. And then that third one is to propel. So you're going to position yourself to be receptive to what God has. You're going to prepare by fasting, removing any distractions, finding someone you can go to when something does come up, and then when God has finally given you, your calling, what you're supposed to do, you propel. You don't stay where you're at. You don't hold on to it. You don't bury it. You let God use you. And for me personally, those three things have helped me get to where I am. Obviously there were a lot more factors, but I would tell any teenager that is looking for something, that is, looking for, a church to call home, or is already in church but needs that next step or needs a push, or somebody that has even been in church their whole life, that if they continue to pray and they continue to prepare themselves and to position themselves to what God wants for them and what God has in store for them, then everything else will fall into place. You won't feel alone. You'll have a family. You'll have your church family. You open yourself up to relationships in the church that you never thought you'd have. Because for me, I've been in it 12 years and I'm still meeting new people and people that I can relate to and people that have struggled with the same things that I have, even through like social media. There are so many negative things that go around social media, but like one positive thing is I've met so many people that have struggled with homosexuality, has struggled with addiction, has struggled with depression and anxiety. And it's so encouraging to know that, you're not alone, even in the church. Like there are still people in the church that are not perfect, that have the struggles.
Right.
So just to remember that, you're not alone, whether you're just getting into church, you've been in it for years, there's always somebody else. There's always a group of people that are there for you and that know what you're going through.
Right. That's so good. But yeah, I really appreciate what you just shared. That's so powerful. And I am so glad that you found a safe person to talk to, because I don't think that's the case for a lot of people. But that is the beautiful thing about social media, is that we could find each other. We could find somebody who we could trust as far as a godly person, a godly influence, hopefully another apostolic. If we are struggling with these things, especially if you're a young person in the church, hiding it, it's not going to go away.
Absolutely.
It's gonna come back at some point. It's going to be something that you're going to have to deal with, that we're going to have to deal with, especially when it comes to our identity. And I know for me, that was a struggle. I also had a lot of trust issues, with men. And I remember even when I was on the phone with Jonathan at one time, I had talked about, possibly wanting to date, the same sex. I was like, oh, maybe I should date a girl or something. Just in passing, it's just like literally something that is not even thought of, as far as like you don't really overanalyze it sometimes
Right.
when you're in the world. It's just kind of like, yeah, sure, why not?
Absolutely.
Which is kind of sad, because it should be a big deal.
Right.
And they treat it like it's not. So I had the question, and you kind of talked a little bit about it, but what has God taught you? I know it's probably a lot, but what has God taught you about biblical sexuality versus obviously that in the world through your experience and becoming apostolic?
For me personally, it's always very touchy, and especially right now. And I mean, even right now, it's, Pride Month. So everybody is, pushing that. And, the environment nowadays is so, if you are not gay, you're not bi, you're not trans, then you're in the wrong. Like, then, it's, why aren't you this way? And I watched a video with, it was Brother Bernard, David Bernard, and he was talking about homosexuality. And he made the comment that so many people think that, like in the LGBTQ community, that they make the statement, you're born this way. And he made the comment that you're not born that way. It's not an identity. It's not what you identify as. It's what you're acting on. So if, you're constantly around situations where, you have those thoughts, because we're born into sin. So obviously sin is there. It's whether or not you act on it. So for me personally, I struggle. I mean, you'll have those desires of, if you're bisexual or gay or, whatever, it's whether or not you act on it.
I always try and be obviously respectful, and I'm always careful, obviously, what I say, not because of fear, but out of respect. You know what I mean?
Right.
For the
Yeah.
person's soul. And I have family that are not in church, and I am trying to always be careful, not to make them feel alienated or anything like that, because if something were to happen, I would want to still have that open communication, that open path, that they know they could talk to me about anything.
Absolutely.
Or they could come to me about anything, especially something like this. And one of the things that really burdens my heart is, just because I don't advocate for something doesn't mean that I hate it, like hate the person.
Yeah.
It's the sin, because sin destroys. And the reason why homosexuality is a sin, besides the fact that it's going against the makeup of how we are as men and women, and kind of going against the family makeup that God placed in the first place, it's also telling God that, no, I'm not going to take the identity that you've given me. I'm going to make my own.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that's where we have to, when we're talking to people, or if it comes up, we can do it in a way that is honoring God without, I guess, destroying people in negative ways, because it is going to come across negative anyway, because nobody's going to want to hear it, especially in this day and age. But I think there is always a respectful, loving way that we could talk to people about this without having to talk down to them and being condescending and being like mean spirited, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and when it's such a touchy subject, especially nowadays, and whenever, you have somebody in the church or somebody that's coming to church, and, they're publicly gay or, bisexual, and they're honestly putting forth the effort to, go to church and to live right, you have to be so careful not to fall into the, judgment of, well, you're gay, you're bisexual. Like so many people put up that wall of, ooh, like, but
Yes.
that's like, I mean, you put that kind of attitude and homosexuality is equivalent. Like sin is sin, whether you think like, this sin is greater than this sin, it's different. Like it's a different kind of sin, but it's on the same level. It's the same. You always have to be careful with how you approach it, for sure.
Besides the fact that it's everywhere, these are subjects that we should at least discuss with our young people and teenagers Absolutely. In the church, because if we aren't talking about it, it doesn't mean they're not talking about it.
Right. Yeah.
like you said, you had somebody safe to go to talk to. We would, I would hope that many of us would be a safe person for those teenagers.
Well, and especially with, this subject, or even, just anything in any struggle in general, for me, it's whenever I know somebody is coming to me, or whenever I have a friend that comes to me, I am always, Lord, give me the eyes to see, the heart to feel, the ears to listen, and the arms to hug, because I don't know what they need to hear from me. I don't know what they need spoken into their life, but let me be led by him, because I don't ever want to say the wrong thing. I want them to, feel comfort and in coming to me, but I also, want to lead them correctly. And
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like anybody in our in church should, like, in general, just, have that approach to any situation, even if you're not comfortable. Like, if somebody feels comfortable coming to you but you're not comfortable about the situation, you should just, direct them in, to a person that, you feel should, like, would approach it differently, or approach it the way that maybe that person needs to hear it. Even if you're, even if you're not that person that they need to talk to, you're always, you know, just an ear for somebody to listen, or just to talk to, or whatever. But just to kind of be willing to listen and guide them, you know, in the path that they might need.
So, how can we, as like the church, help new teenagers coming into the church, or young people coming into the church? Like, how can we better serve them? Like, what helped you?
I think one of the things that I remember the most whenever I first started going to church and attending church was, it wasn't always like church topics of conversation. Like, it was never, throwing the Bible in your face kind of thing. Like, it was, they established a relationship, they established that um, connection with the, new members and the new converts. And then they, like, found a doorway to start talking about church, or, if, or standards. For me personally was a thing. Like, I went to church for maybe a year and a half before I even started wearing skirts.
Mm-hmm.
But the women that I looked up to and that I have established a relationship at the time with, they knew how I felt. They knew my personality. They had established that relationship. They knew that, they could approach it in a specific direction, to where, I wouldn't get upset, or, I would be understanding, or, stuff like that. So I feel like if church members would put first the connection and try to connect with the newer members, that it would open up that door to having those conversations. Because these are all very, like, personal. If this is, if I'm struggling with something, I'm not just going to go to some random person at church. I'm going to go to someone at church that has, it took the time to, talk to me, established a relationship, and I feel comfortable with talking about those kinds of things. I'm not just going to, run up to someone random and just be like, I'm struggling with this, I'm struggling with that. So I feel like establishing a relationship foremost is very, very important. And when you do have that relationship, then you can help lead, help guide, and instruct those that, have started to come to church.
Yeah, that's really good. I like that you said connection. That's so important. It's so easy for us to think like talk at people instead of like talking
Mhm.
with people.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we want to like unload like all of the Ten Commandments, all of the,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know, all whatever
The do's and
knowledge.
don'ts.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. On like the first day. And it's like, hold up. Okay. You don't give
Right.
a baby a drumstick. You know what I mean?
Right.
You give them a bottle full of milk and you let them take their time. And then
Absolutely.
eventually, then you could give them a little bit of meat.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And connection too. It's honestly just acknowledging, hey, you're a real person. I'm a real person. Here's what we have in common. And let's just chat a little bit. And we make it so difficult. And I think sometimes we make it so clinical. We make it
Mm,
so like impersonal. Because we have like a goal for, I don't know, soul winning, or we have a goal for filling the church pew. And I'm just saying this in general. I'm not thinking of a specific person or church or
no,
anything like that. But, sometimes it's that like mindset that we have of just like, we got to fill them, fill these seats. We got to make them come in. And it's like, yeah, but I heard someone say that God's into the marinating. He's not into microwave ministry.
absolutely.
It's like, yeah, marinating takes time. It's that connection. It's like getting real with people.
Absolutely.
Uh, don't just like, have this like instant pot, like we want
Absolutely.
everything
Yeah.
right here, right now, fast food type, mentality
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to souls. I think we have to be careful with that, especially young people, teenagers who are coming with their own, everybody comes with baggage, of course, but they're coming with a whole different level, such a vulnerable age. And like you said, dealing with identity, probably dealing with sexuality, probably depression and anxiety and addiction, all sorts of things. And if you're going to just have them sit there but not connect with them, then what's the point?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, you want kids and young adults and youth, they're looking for something real. They don't want, and they're looking for something eternal. Like they don't want
Mm-hmm.
something that is going to, satisfy them or, give them attention for just a moment. They want something that's going to last. And I mean, not all relationships, friendships, they last forever, but in the church world, it's very important to, have those people that once you establish it, it carries on. It's not just for a brief moment or for a brief situation. It's one of those things where, you always have somebody that you can go to no matter what.
Yeah, I actually have a couple of teenagers who are my nieces, and one of them said to me, the biggest turnoff for a teenager, especially in the church, is when an adult talks to them in a patronizing way.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wow, tell me more, because we think sometimes like how we talk to them is like on point, but they can smell a phony from a mile away.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree with you. They're just like, just be real with me. Stop
Yeah,
talking down to me or acting like I don't know anything.
absolutely.
Because most teenagers, even though they might act like they know everything, I doubt they'll claim to know everything.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's all in our approach and in our connection and making sure we're actually like talking with them like they're real people, because they are.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to just give you some time to share anything else about your story or about what you've learned that might help, anybody out there, any age really, if they're struggling with depression, if they're really questioning their identity, no matter how old they are, just dealing with some things in the church that you dealt with, outside and in the church, just whatever God has placed on your heart. I wanted you to just have some time, wanted you to just have time to just speak on that and to kind of dive into that, whatever you feel led to.
For those that are struggling with anxiety and depression, and identity crisis, their homosexuality, it is so imperative that you know that you are not alone. No matter you're, not in church, getting into church, been in church for years, everybody struggles with something. And you're not the first, you're not going to be the last, but it is so important for you to know that you're not alone, that, I mean, when the world will fail you, God will be there. He will never forsake you. And if if it's imperative that you have somebody to talk to, find someone, whether it's your pastor, your student pastor, a family member in church, a friend in church. Just find somebody that you can talk to, because it's important for you to know that you're not alone. And that, I mean, find your outlet. For me, it was, for my struggling with depression and anxiety, mine was always worship. My outlet was worship. If, I noticed that, during the mornings I would be more upset, or at the nights I would be more upset. So I created a upbeat playlist of worship music that was my favorite. And I would start my day off with worship. I would end my day with worship. And for me personally, that has helped my attitude and outlook on everything, because when I'm struggling with something, or I'm having a bad day, and I turn my eyes, I turn my heart, I turn my mind to God, and just put my attention on Him, all of those little things become so small. And when you have your heart and your mind, and you solely sell yourself out to God, nothing else matters. And all of those struggles and those doubts and, all of those thoughts, they go away.
Oh, so good. Well, Emily, I really appreciate your time, and I would love it if you would just let everybody know where they could find you on social media, where they could message you, chat with you, all the things.
Absolutely. My name is Emily Scott. I have Facebook, I have Instagram, and that's about it. I'm not really that sociable as far as social media goes, but just, Facebook and Instagram.
It's okay. That is plenty. There's plenty on there. Well, thank you, Emily, so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. I really appreciate you for having me.
If you found this episode inspiring or helpful, would you take a screenshot of it and share it on your Instagram stories, tagging me at Hello Awesome Live? I would be so encouraged. Also, please leave a 5-star review in iTunes or Apple Podcasts, sharing how God used this to bless you. Don't forget to subscribe so you can tune into future episodes. To learn more about Hello Awesome and shop inspirational products, head to helloawesome.live using the promo code HELLO10 for 10% off your next purchase. Until next time, keep your chin up, beautiful.